Well, today is our first Yachting Yogis interview with a yoga teacher, and we're going to be talking with Lauren Altura, who was our yoga teacher today, who did a magnificent job, by the way, teaching yoga on the yacht. And we're discussing the yogi's journey, and specifically Lauren's journey from her previous life to her current life and the lessons learned along the way. So perhaps we can start off this conversation with you telling us just a little bit about yourself and your background and what life was like before you got into yoga.
Well, just before I got into yoga, I was in law school, and my main exercise / release / meditation was running. And really, in high temperatures, I was running on the streetcar tracks down in New Orleans, where I went to law school at Loyola University. And I didn't have a yoga practice. I didn't really know, I knew about yoga, but of course not in any way, shape, or form that I now know yoga. And so when I moved after law school to San Francisco for my first job as an attorney, I was very cold, it was very hilly, and I found myself in a Bikram studio in hot yoga. And I stayed with that because I was cross-training to run a marathon in Hawaii. So I needed 3 things to cross-train with: swimming, running, and yoga. So I stayed with Bikram for a while, and then I literally burnt myself out of this practice because it was too hot. I got too dehydrated and would stay up all night drinking loads of water, and I could never come back from this. And so I literally walked up from Larkin to Sanyan, and I found a chain of yoga studios known as Yoga Tree, and I've been practicing with them for the last almost 20 years, which was eventually purchased by YogaWorks. And incidentally, YogaWorks is the first yoga corporation to ever be publicly traded, and it went on the NASDAQ about 4 summers ago.
And what was the transition for you from being a student to becoming a teacher?
The transition was I was on my way from San Francisco to Larkspur to meet with an expert witness about a case that I was working on. And I was hit by somebody I believed to be a drunk driver in a T-bone accident, and it took me about 2 years to recover from this accident. And during this time, I just kept relying on yoga and physical therapy at UCSF. And as I mentioned to you before, I had a mind-blowing meditation experience. And I was also on a lot of painkillers, and it was the first time that I had to use drugs. And it's just a horrible feeling of constantly loading my body with painkillers. So I just kept doubling down on all my practices, and I was actually on a retreat up in Calistoga. And I was sitting looking across the water, and I said, oh, well, this makes so much sense for me. I should actually do this more. And I went to my first yoga teacher training, and that was about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And I've never stopped. And I just keep training with every master teacher that appeals to me that I can find, and improving my practice, improving my meditation skills, improving my understanding of the underpinnings of yoga and the yoga philosophy, learning more Sanskrit, traveling with different teachers. I just went to Bali in March and did a water ceremony there, which was fantastic in that culture. And just really immersing myself in this amazing, it's my reality. It could seem like a bubble to some, I understand that, but it's definitely my reality, and it should be everyone's reality to be in this state of, it's just more of a conscious state.
And what do you think keeps most people from entering that reality?
Fear, not enough information, thinking maybe it requires, it's just for flexible people.
So you came to yoga for the physical benefits, and then you discovered the non-physical benefits.
Correct.
And how long did it take you after discovering yoga? Did it take you to discover the non-physical benefits, and how did that happen?
I don't think I was aware. I knew that it was not just a physical practice, but I was in it for the purely physical practice, and I don't think for years that I was conscious of the other benefits that I was receiving from it. I think probably when I got into that car accident, it took about 2 years to heal, that I became aware more on a conscious level that it was the mind stuff, the chitta, vritti, the churnings of all the mind fluctuations, that I was aware that it was having an impact on the monkey mind, my ability to calm my mind with all those mental fluctuations.
And as you discovered that, what sort of changes did you notice happening in your regular life?
Just more awareness of my interactions with people, and more aware of when I was starting to feel something on an intuitive level. We talked about other ways to discern things beyond the eyes, the actual eyes and the ears. So I think it gives you a context for using other senses. And you open up all those doors and windows. And the nadis, the energy channels, it's all referred to in the yoga philosophy.
You know, stepping back a second, I'm curious about this mind-blowing meditation experience you had. Can you tell us what that was and describe it?
All right. So I was actually in a public class, which sometimes during public classes there could be room for meditation in the beginning or the end. And it was actually in an evening class, and I remember the specific class, the teacher had put all sorts of, you could almost think of it as like holiday or disco lights around the room. And the room was dimly lit, but there were candles and lights. You could see, but you couldn't see. It was sort of darkened. And so it was more of a cave-like experience where you could go inward, and we had the physical practice. So we had the moving around, and by the way, that's why we move around so much before we go into Shavasana, so you can have that release and you can be in your body. And it's the same with meditation. It's why we do asanas, the physical practice, so we can move into the meditation practice. And so I had the physical practice, and I was in the meditation, and I wasn't expecting anything. I didn't have any preconceived notions as to how this meditation was going to play out, or if it was even going to be a good one. You can characterize it as good. But I was sitting there, and it was, like we've also discussed today, I was having literally some form of an outer body experience, if that's the words you could use to describe it. And I was thinking of this giant, almost a cylinder, like a glass or acrylic, a gigantic tube, and that I was surrounded by water, but I could breathe, and the tube was propelling me upwards in this giant cylinder, and there was light at the top, and the water and the suction was like causing me to move upwards, and it was just this feeling of like opening up. Everything was opening up towards the light, and it was just this feeling of complete bliss and calm and joy.
How long have you been teaching?
This is my 8th year.
And in the time that you've been teaching, what do you think are the most significant things that you've learned about yourself?
That I can see myself and watching my students from where I was in my practice, physically, mentally, being able to read. When I first started practicing, one of my early teachers said to me, "Do you push through everything? And are you breathing?" And I guess at that time in my life, I just kept pushing through whatever I was doing. It was just going to happen. No one was going to stand in my way. But was I breathing through all this, or just tensing and, increasing all the bad chemicals in my body? Was I just making my whole body toxic by not breathing? And so I can see this in my different students' practices. Physically, mentally, breath-wise, I can see all these different ways that I've learned to adapt to the practice. And I've actually gotten fitting in these different places in my practice. So it's amazing to see yourself and your students and recognize those things.
And how's that helped you in everyday life?
To have more compassion for people. I think it's a real practice about just, it's about humanity and seeing people beyond all the labels and the self-imposed identities, society's imposed identities. You see people more as humans and less as this or that in these different roles.
So you feel more connected to...
Yeah, definitely more connected. A lot more connected.
And those tools you bring to your students, so what do you think makes you different as a yoga teacher than a lot of other teachers out there? What does Lauren bring to the studio?
Well, I always try to include the philosophy behind the physical practice, and I also like to include Dharma talks because it's not just, I don't view it as just a physical practice. And I also like to include mantra, meditation aspects of the practice. I like to include more of a view across the spectrum that so many of these practices, yoga, asana, the physical practice, meditation, chanting, mantra, all of these are part of a greater whole, which is to practice the essence of finding a state of being as opposed to doing.
A lot of yoga and yoga practice and a lot of suffering, really, going into Buddhism to some degree, has to do with attachment. What do you think you've had to let go of to walk the path that you're walking?
Well, it's the need to be right, or the need to think that there's just one perspective on something. And I think it just gives you a shift in perspective, and not just in one area, one category. So many different areas. Should we talk now? Lots of different areas.
Such as, like, what's the most significant area? It's one. It's had the most, letting go of that one thing has had the most impact to improve your life.
I think I had to, at one point, let go of my identity as a lawyer. I had spent so many years at school and studying and taking the bar exam and having this job and then climbing the ladder to this job and then that job, and that I was so invested in this identity that I couldn't really see anything else. and I could never see myself doing anything else. That when I decided to become a yoga teacher, it was a shock to myself. It was also a shock to all my family and friends. They didn't understand what this was. They said, "Oh, why did you go to school for all those years and now you want to be a gym teacher?" They had no idea what this is, and perhaps in some people still don't. It's never been a part of the practice. It's something that you can read about, and it's something that people can tell you about, but until you have the experience on your own, there's no, you have to have the direct experience to have knowledge of the subject. It's a vast subject.
Oh, yes.
Do you think you would have made the transition if you hadn't been in that car crash?
That I don't know, but I know something had to give because yeah, I know that I needed a change at that point, but it was kind of forced upon me. It was involuntary.
So you now consider that a blessing?
Maybe.
So there are a lot of people out there who want to make a change. I mean, they're not happy with their current life, and they have some idea or some dream or some inkling of what they'd rather do, but they're never going to, unfortunately, experience something like the car crash. So now that you've made that change and you've grown so much as a person, if you were to go back to before the car crash, what do you think you could have done and other people can do to cause them to make that change without having to go through such a traumatic experience?
Yeah. I mean, it's a question of finding a practice and committing to it. Finding a teacher, finding a center, finding some place where you can go a couple times a week and start to learn the practice and invest in the practice. And some people go and I see them working really hard and see all the blood rushing to the skin and the sweat, and I can see that there's been a release and they're energized. And maybe even they just say, "Wow, your classes have changed my life," and maybe I don't see them again, or maybe I see them several times a week. But it's something that you can't try it just one or two times. It's something you have to actually, and it's talked about this in the ancient text in the Yoga Sutras. Master Patanjali writes that to benefit from the yoga practice, it has to be consistent and taken over a long period of time.
So it's a commitment.
It's like anything else in your life. For it to work, you're going to have to keep going, even on the days that you don't want to go. And that's another big part of the practice is the tapas, which is a Sanskrit word for the heat or the discipline of the practice. And we feel it, when we're moving our bodies, and we physically start to generate that heat, or we feel that the practice is becoming intense, but it actually makes the Shavasana that much sweeter because we rise to the discipline of the practice. And not just in the actual practice, but another part of the discipline of the practice is to keep going, to keep the momentum, and to explore other parts of yoga, like the philosophy, mantra chanting, meditation practices, silent meditation, vipassana, that sort of thing.
And then, of course, the other limbs of yoga.
Yes.
And the whole notion of the yogic lifestyle, which I think to a lot of people sounds, sort of out there. But when you really break it down, there are many, many practical applications in our everyday living for more peace and more harmony and more balance. If you teach where now?
At Yoga Works.
Up in
Yoga Works in the North Bay, Yoga Works in Mill Valley, and Yoga Works in Novato.
So if someone wanted to get a hold of you, if you wanted to get a hold of you, how would you do that?
Yeah, shoot me an email, laurenaltura gmail, or you can find me, Lauren Altura Yoga, on Facebook or Instagram,
Well,
or the Yoga Works website.
well, I'd like to thank you for coming out today,
Yeah.
for teaching today. You did a great practice out there. I mean, I think everybody really enjoyed it.
And I enjoyed your meditation as well.
Okay, thanks. And thanks for taking a little time to share some of your thoughts with us.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.